What is the strangest thing you found in your house/property after you bought it? We found a stack of acrylic paintings in the basement, all very amateurish. Subjects ranged from creepy little girls to 70s psychedelics nude ladies. The realtor told the owners to pick them up or they would end up in the trash. They showed up a year later asking for them. Bonus, the junk removal guy loved the 70s nudes. He asked to keep them. Number 2. The previous owner's wife had passed away not long before we purchased the house. About a week after we took possession, the realtor called us and asked if we'd found the owner's wife's wedding ring in the master bedroom closet. We had not. A few years later, we were cleaning on top of the kitchen cabinets and found the ring. Why it was on top of the kitchen cabinets, we'll never know. We were able to track down the owner, though, and return it. Number 3. My parents bought a home that used to be a funeral parlor almost 100 years ago. Dad had never questioned why there was a second bulkhead that went nowhere, and when there was a bust pipe, they finally had to cut it open. Inside, we found a small walled-off room that had hundreds of old bottles. Odd equipment, chemicals/perfumed salts, stained glass windows from the original building, and a few old ledgers plus accounting books. My parents had no use for it, and a local antique shop/owner town historian happily took it when offered. We had received some old copies of photos of how the house originally looked a few years later. Number 4. A colorized, colors filled in by hand, very large black and white photograph in an ornate gilded frame found in the attic. The photo showed a young child in a white lacy dress wearing a cowboy hat and boots, standing on the steps of a city building, think brownstone, with a pony. The house was in the Midwest and not near a city where such buildings might be found. It was an old photo, and you could not tell if this was a girl or a boy, since boys used to wear dresses. But what you could tell, and could not be denied, was that the child was the ugliest child any of us had ever seen. Like, scary ugly. I wasn't even envious about the pony. The kid was just so ugly. We hung the photo in a prominent spot and would make up a story about the person/pony/photo, taking turns. We left the thing in the attic when we sold the house. Didn't seem right to take it. Number 5. Razor blades. The double-edged ones from the old razors. They were in the wall when we opened it up to repair a busted pipe. I noticed a pile of debris in the wall and luckily happened to be wearing gloves. I reached in to grab the debris and throw it away and pulled out a handful of blades. There were several handfuls. I later learned a feature of the mid-century modern bathroom was a blade disposal slot in the back of the medicine cabinet. Super gross and creepy. Also, if you're going to move a bathroom wall in an MCM house, be on the lookout. Number 6. Not a house, but a car. Brought home a used 2000 Explorer with a couple thousand miles on it. Saw a piece of paper behind the plastic of the glove compartment, back where the light bulb is. I carefully pulled it out. It's a white envelope. Inside is roughly $1,000 in various bills. We called the dealership to ask them what to do, but for some reason they could not contact the seller of the vehicle, or the seller of the vehicle refused to be contacted. I wanted to turn it in because $1,000 really freaking helped me out. I would be financially devastated if I lost that much cash. That was a good year. Number 7. Oh, I might win this thread. I was taking down some old ceiling tiles in my basement one fine summer day. Things were going surprisingly well. No bugs, mice, or asbestos. Until I shifted the tile that's directly above the boiler. I saw something rolling off the tile and felt it hit my shoulder. I looked down, and in a small pile of dust and paper debris was a wooden dildo. A sizable and clearly used wooden dildo. Now, I was still holding the tile above my head and realized that it was heavier than what the last few had been. Great. I definitely was not expecting a fleet anima, old and yellowed condoms, or the mice nest made with shredded pornography that was containing all of the previously mentioned items. It was like holding a platter of nightmares. But I think the worst part of all of that was when I started to dump it all into the trash. I noticed there was a book under the rest. I won't ever forget the title either. It was called Concentration Camp Bestiality. And that was just the start of the stash I had uncovered. The next tile had far more books and magazines. I called the police once I found photos of minors. They ended up taking away a whole box of books, magazines, film negatives, and loose photos. They did leave me with the wooden dildo though. God mercy. The basement still gives me the creeps sometimes. Number 8. My house has a two-person jacuzzi tub with mirrors on 3 walls around it. When I was looking at the house, there was a 4-post canopy bed with a mirror inside the canopy. Needless to say, the previous owner had his thing. When I was moving in, I found in the basement a bar with cuffs on either end hanging from the ceiling and 2 eye bolts and a board on the floor that would have made this a perfect place for someone to be tied up spread eagle. I strongly suspect that this is what it was used for. I have a room that used to be a bar. Previous owner took the bar itself with him despite it being built in. It has a dropped ceiling and the lights are above with clear panels to let the light through. I was moving ceiling tiles to change a bulb and got hit in the face by what I'm guessing was a homemade sex swing that was bolted to the rafters above. I've been in the house for 15 years and I still occasionally find a secret panel in a wall. It seems like anywhere there was an extra bit of space, he put a removable panel to make a hidden storage space. And despite all of that, the single most surprising thing I found in the house is the light switch in the bathroom that has power going to it, but doesn't seem to actually switch anything in the house. What do you do, mysterious switch? When will you stop taunting me and give me your secrets? Number 9. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, southern Idaho. The farm my folks rented was very odd. There was a ton of old farm equipment from the 40s and 50s, as well as several, about 10, old 50s cars just scattered around the property and hidden in the tree line. The owner had a small shed on the property she asked us to never open. No worries. It sat between the garage and an old mobile home trailer that we never used. We moved away, and shortly after, the new owner died. New property owners went into the shed, and they found tons of old World War II and older equipment. Guns, bayonets, a Nazi flag, all sorts of stuff. The shed even had an old-school dirt wall basement that had old radios and tons of other crazy stuff. Unfortunately, after the new owners started messing with the shed, the basement, being dirt and all, eventually gave away and a lot of stuff was damaged. They were able to salvage a lot and sold it, so it all worked out. Most I found was a previous tenant's pornography stash. As a teenager in the old trailer, that was the best find ever. Number 10. Okay, this was when we were selling, not buying, but I guess it qualifies for the question. Anyway, my grandmother had passed away from ovarian cancer several years ago, and we were just getting around to cleaning out her apartment in northern Serbia to sell it off. There was all the usual Slavic babushka stuff, knitting supplies, weird children's books, communist memorabilia, a piano, birdseed, and the like. It was actually sort of fun getting to experience the history she lived through one last time, but the coolest thing by far was the stash of Austro-Hungarian coins. They were tucked away behind what was previously a seemingly immovable bookshelf. 10 to 15 gleaming gold 4 ducat coins from 1915, something completely unusual for a former socialist schoolteacher to possess. Thankfully, there was a note with them that explained everything. When Tito's revolutionaries took over Yugoslavia from the Nazis, they tried to reclaim the wealth of their country by going door to door and taking everyone's valuables. In a panic, some family sold off their coins to my great-grandmother, who took the risk to stash them away. Thankfully, he passed inspection and was able to keep the coins. He then went on to live happily ever after as a watchmaker in his village, never spending or even touching the coins again in his life. If either he or my grandmother had been found with them, there would probably have been not too good consequences facing them. But they never were, and the ducats survived long past the fall of Yugoslavia to that day when my mother and I were dismantling my grandmother's apartment. 11. 10 years I've lived in my house, but until recently had never been in the attic. It's a push-up hatch, rather than a pull-down ladder combo, so it wasn't very accessible. There was a weird smell one day, and I was afraid something may have passed away up there, so I pulled out the ladder, lifted the hatch, and poked my head up there to check it out. Right next to the hatch in the attic was a huge pile of what looked like stuffing, but turned out to be a gigantic 6 or 7 foot stuffed person, like the biggest voodoo doll there ever was, but all white. I tried moving it around a bit to get it out of the way, because it was insanely heavy and hard to move. It was torn in places and full of 100 years of dust, stuffing, and whatever the hell else, so yeah, I just left it there, closed the hatch, and called it a day. Number 12. As the owner and renovator of two 100-year-plus houses, quite a few things. The guy who built the one house moved to Canada with his family as a child when they were run out of town for being horse thieves. He made quite a bit of money running horses up from the States, breaking them as he went and selling them to the Northern RCMP detachments in the 1880s. Judging from the amount of stuff we've found in the walls, he either put it there deliberately or was just using the space for storage. I've also found full newspapers. The one from when Thomas Edison died is in perfect condition. A whole bunch of ceramic marbles. 100-year-old Koopai dolls. Those are exceptionally creepy when you dig them out of insulation. A Model T Ford key. A 100-year-old business ledger. Hobnail boots that could probably be rehabbed and worn. Random's children toys. A collection of some of the worst cowboy poetry and love letters, or a mix of both, and much more. Number 13. When I was a teen, my mom worked for a cool little insurance company that was family-owned. When I was 16, the family wanted to expand and asked my mom if she wanted to be the lead for expansion, which basically meant the family bought a small 2-bedroom house a few towns over and used the house as a second office. My mom was the only worker in the office for a long time, so I'd often go with her after school and just kinda helped her file and explore the area. One day, I noticed a tiny door inside a closet on the top floor in the unused bedroom. So naturally, I went exploring. The door took you through a small crawl space like tunnel until you suddenly dropped into a small room. The tunnel was like 2 feet from the floor of this room. It was unfinished without drywall or windows, but it had a small wooden spool table thingy, a single stool that looked pretty rickety, a teddy bear that looked fairly new, some kids' toys that very much were not new, a small box I couldn't open, and blank papers just thrown everywhere. The room didn't lead anywhere else and didn't have any other doors. The floor of it had super creaky wooden planks spaced just far enough for a tiny trickle of light to seep through. But I couldn't tell where the light was or what part of the house the room was built over. I took the teddy bear to show my mom, and her boss ended up letting me keep it. I think I still have it somewhere. I'm not sure what the room was for, but it looked like a kid somewhere along the road made it into a hideaway. It was pretty neat, but super out of place for the fairly remodeled house it was in. 14. We had a small island in a field out behind our house that was pretty grown over. My siblings and I would go out there and play pretend, and there were several slabs of cement we would pretend was Pride Rock from The Lion King. Didn't think much of it at the time, but after a while we would dig out there, and it turns out an old barn had burned down on that patch of land, and it was full of old glass bottles and bricks with my town's name on it. Number 15. My dad moved into an apartment, and the whole place had its nice original wood flooring from the 1940s, except for the living room, which had carpet. Kind of a bummer because the wood looked nicer, but oh well. One problem though, when it's warm out, the living room smells. Can you guess where this is going? My dad decided to investigate and eventually peeled the carpet up to find a large black stain on the subfloor. A black stain so large a person could lie inside of it. The last tenant died and melted in the living room, and all they did was pull the hardwood up. Ugh. Number 16. My mom bought her house 12 years ago. But last year, my mentally unstable brother kicked the front door down. The door had a giant metal lock on it. It didn't work, we just used the deadbolt, but kept the lock on because the house was built in 1795 and it looked cool. Anyway, the lock broke off and a bunch of little papers and cards fell out of it. Among them were CIA ID badges, business cards that had to do with cryptography, and other things that had to do with the CIA. A few days later, I thought I would look through the house in search of more CIA stuff, and I stumbled upon a World War II explosive round under one of the floorboards in the attic. That was a wild week. Number 17. When I was mad at my parents, I knew that I'd forgive them and forget why I was ever mad in the first place. In my anger, I conceived this plan to write down why they made me mad on a teeny tiny piece of paper and hide it, so I could rediscover it someday. I hid these little reminders in the wooden slats of my closet door. I'd stuff them in the little cracks of the baseboard, in between any chipping or peeling paint in the wall. I never discovered any of them. Whatever poor soul that bought the house after I graduated high school got to discover all the causes of my teenage angst. Number 18. Not my house, but I was the one that crawled into the attic and found the booty. My friends bought a house a few years ago and had a holiday housewarming party, ornament decoration station, and all that. During the party, the friends told us the house had been flipped and that the house flippers had overhauled everything except the attic, and had told my friends that they had found some weird stuff in the main house from the original owners who were hoarders. Friends had not looked in the attic yet because they had no ladder, and frankly didn't have the motivation to do so because moving. Anyhow, I had a few drinks by then and I did have the motivation to do so. So, I pulled myself up and into the attic to what I can only describe as a gloriously salacious and cluttered scene. Scores of gay pornography magazines dating back to the 80s, dispersed and piled in layers of glossy copy and broken furniture pieces. Dozens of VHS recordings with handwritten titles that were amazing and freaking filthy. A Papazian chair, rug, and a terrible TV and VCR from who knows when. Hooks screwed into beams that ran across the rather low ceiling, leather straps about wrist size attached, and a possible vintage strap thingy. Anyhow, I started freaking out from excitement, and another partygoer hoisted himself up. We picked a few dozen magazines that were in better condition and started throwing them down the attic opening, along with the leather straps I had found and some old choice VHS tapes. The party's ornament decorating station devolved, or evolved depending on who you were talking to, into decoupaging the male genitalia onto glass balls, which we hung on their inaugural Christmas tree along with the leather straps. I took home this really interesting, undated softcover volume called The Leatherman's Workbook, which was erotica accompanied by hardcore illustrations and several photo essays. I tried to find the history of it, but was unsuccessful. Anyhow, my friend's new house got adequately warmed that night.